watching Cablevision, Channel 31, local origination programming, your hometown network.
Welcome to Mind Over Matter. Pleasure today to have Edward Dalton, who is a forensic social worker working in the Norfolk County court system. And today we're going to talk about a subject that I know is on lots of people's minds, in part because of the headlines that we read almost daily, and that is kids in trouble. So perhaps we could start by talking a little bit about who's getting into trouble these days. Perhaps also, what some of the factors are that lead to that.
Sure. I think it's a wide range. I don't think it's only the child having trouble in school or the adolescent who drops out. I don't think it's only the kids from so-called multi-problem, high-risk families. I think we've seen both locally and across the country kids from middle-class and upper-middle-class families, kids who have beautiful houses in suburbia or exurbia, making bombs in their garage, concocting all different kinds of weapons to take into school. So I think there's a wide range. And I think there's a danger in trying to look too closely, trying to define who exactly is the child who's getting into trouble. I think it does a disservice to the child. I think it does a disservice to us. I think it lulls us into thinking we actually have an idea as to who this person or who this group is. It's not to say that it doesn't make sense to me that we shouldn't have some cohort of factors that we can look at and think about in terms of what are an assessment type tool to look at what is the potential risk. But I'm frequently asked this in the court setting, for example. What's the likelihood that this person or that person is going to, and it's young people and old people as well, that they're going to get into some kind of trouble? And we can look at actuarial data in terms of age groups or race or socioeconomic status. But I've seen that those aren't good predictors. I mean, we often say, those of us who are involved in forensic mental health and in issues of dangerousness and likelihood of harm, we talk about the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And I think that that's significant. But that's as true for good deeds as it is for bad deeds. Someone who gives to charity every year is more likely than someone who doesn't to continue to give. So looking at past behavior is the best predictor of any kind of future behavior. I think there are both every reason you can possibly imagine and no particular reason as to why do young people get into trouble. I mean, we interview numbers of young people shortly after engaging in violent behavior. What were you thinking? What was going on? And you often get a shrug, I don't know, or nothing at all. And there's a rush at that point, I think, both in the courts or in private practice, when I have a young person come into my office with frantic parents saying, we've got to do something now. There's this rush to fix something. And I think that there's some good common sense to that. I mean, my opening question to most people, whether or not it's in my consultation room or at the courthouse, is why now? Why are you here now? Why did this problem seem to blow up yesterday or whenever? And I think we know, those of us who spend a fair amount of time talking to young people, that there may well be sort of one final trigger. But when you hear something like, I shoved her against the wall of the mall and pointed my knife at her to get her jacket or her sneakers, things like that don't fit. They don't make a lot of sense. And I think they don't because while that particular desiring those sneakers or that jacket may have been the final precursor, the final kind of antecedent that led up to the attack. There are a myriad of those things that are really the vital issues that led up to that, whatever they are, whether or not it was day after day, if we look at the perpetrator of the crime, and was it weeks before the incident or the assault. Was this, and I'll just say it's a young boy, was he going to his parents saying, I really want that jacket, I need that jacket, you got one for my brother Tom, I really want it, hey, I'll deliver papers, I'll do this, I'll do that. Those are the things we hear over time, but when we're doing an emergency evaluation in the court, or somebody, as I said, comes rushing into my office, we don't hear that. At that point, the kids tend to close down. It's hard to know what they're thinking. They'll either shrug, they'll say, oh, it's stupid. If they have remorse at that point, the remorse is likely more about, I'm sorry I got caught, sort of the first level of remorse. So I think it's very difficult to predict who is going to do behavior A, B, and C.
But let me just stay with that for a moment, because we've got cohorts here. You're talking about a group of people who are now brought to your attention. So they've already signaled trouble. They're already in some kind of trouble, as opposed to the other cohort of people out there who have yet to define themselves. And I think maybe in the second segment, I'd like to talk about risk factors, say, for those people where you might go to the high school and say, well, here's a group who are potentially at risk, but who haven't defined. Among the people who have defined themselves, you're suggesting that it's hard to predict who's going to get into trouble again. It's hard to understand sometimes the trouble. In that group, are there demographic considerations? Are these people pretty widely distributed among all socioeconomic groups, for example?
I think they are, but I have a bias in that. And as I said just a moment ago, I'm often asked to make a prediction based on actuarial type data. And I think while it's a place to begin, so we're looking at 16 to 21-year-old high school dropouts from families with incomes below the poverty level, I think the data like that give us a place to start, but I don't think they really explain anything. And we see this time and again. You'll look at two kids raised in very similar, we'll say impoverished backgrounds, who one grows up to be the vice president of an agribusiness in the Midwest, and another grows up to occupy a cell in the state's maximum security psychiatric facility, for example. So I don't think we can just look at the demographics. I don't like the idea, and again, this comes up often in my court work, this notion of sort of herding people into one particular group. The business of the court, it is quick-paced, and we don't have a lot of time to do a long assessment. But I see my job as much as educating people about, well, this is the piece of work we can do today. I don't mean to be Pollyanna-ish about it. The court has a very practical mandate. They have to make a decision that day. That young man or young woman has to be cleared out of the courthouse at the end of the day, very different from the hospital work that you and I have both done and that we know about. Something has to happen. That child either has to be allowed to go back home with the parents, we have to do a placement at one of our adolescent units. If it's a child already involved with probation, maybe they're talking about a DYS commitment for further evaluation. So we have to make some quick decisions. Demographics, actuarial data, history of violence are places to begin, but I don't think they go very far in explaining why now in this particular incident.
Well, but why now is a wonderful question, and we should dwell on it in a minute, but you're in the Norfolk County court system. Are you seeing the same kinds of crime as, for example, your counterpart in the South Boston court or the Dorchester court or the Cambridge court? Are there differences in the quantity and, well, for lack of a better word, quality of crime?
I think what we're seeing all over And I think we see more of this in the urban settings, but drug-related problems we see throughout the courts. And I should make a distinction here, and your viewers, some of your viewers may know this, the adult and juvenile courts are separated now. So I'm in Norfolk County, and the clinic that I work in there deals with adults. Now, for purposes of the court, you're an adult once you become 17. I mean, I can tell you this past week, I saw a couple of 18 or 19-year-olds. Now, in my private practice, I'll see younger kids, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I think there's a wide variety of issues. I think with the younger kids, it's more family-related problems. School difficulties, behavior problems at home, and these are the younger kids that I'm talking about, the 8 and 9-year-olds. I think in mid and later adolescence, it's not all about drugs, but I think when there are drugs involved, you often find, in general, affective problems, moodiness, depression, maybe due to post-traumatic stress situations, maybe due to being an adolescent. At times, just as an example, a parent will come in, this happened the other day, a parent came in saying, someone said my 17-year-old might be borderline. What does that mean? And so I'll spend some time talking about that particular diagnosis, but I'll say, if you look at that diagnosis, a lot of the characteristics of that particular problem are very similar to normal adolescence taken in an extreme. And I'll say, do you see these, so your son wants to spend more time with friends than with you, and he'll say, I don't know what I want to do with my future. Well, that's normal adolescence. You stretch that out, and you have a young person who says, I don't know who I want to hang around with, I don't know what I want to do, I feel suicidal. Well, that's a step or two in the more extreme direction, and I think we need to address something like that. So just as I said before about actuarial data being a place to begin, not an ending place, so too with the diagnosis of bipolar or borderline or whatever. A place for us to sort of coalesce our thoughts, but not to get stuck there.
Well, I think that's a good place to take the break, and perhaps we can pick up with the mental illness aspects of this and maybe look at other risk factors that seem to predispose kids to trouble. So we'll take a break. Thank you.
Where have all the children gone? Long time passing.
Where have all the children gone? Long time ago.
Where have all the children gone? Gone to graveyards one by one.
Oh, when will we ever learn?
Oh, when will we ever learn?
Every day, 10 children are killed by gunfire. The killing won't stop unless you help stop it. Call 1-800-WE-PREVENT to find out what you can do. Not one more lost life, not one more grieving family, not one more.
Oh, when will we ever learn?
What would you do if you had to choose between the buffalo and the giraffes, between a flower or an elephant? What would you choose? What if you had to decide between a 100-year-old tree and a 1,000,000-year-old beach? Between drinking clean water or breathing clean air? Would you make the right choice? Would there be a right choice? Now there's a way to help. Not just one, but all these things. EarthShare, the world's leading environmental groups working together. It's one choice we can all live with. Ask your employer about workplace giving.
let's talk a bit about the whys. And we ended with a reference to mental illness, the fact, maybe that's a harsh way of describing it, but that you find many of these kids, when you have an opportunity to talk to them in the court systems or in your private practice, that they are depressed and or struggling with issues that may be developmental, maybe more than that. Let's talk some about that, and then maybe some of the other whys in terms of kids getting into trouble.
Right. I find that most often it is a problem in the affective or the mood range, and I just as often find that there's a bit of a family history of that, where mom or dad might have been depressed or might be depressed. And that kind of cuts both ways. It's both a curse and a blessing. Some people I see are very willing, some parents are very willing and open to say, you know, we have this problem too, we're alert to it, that's the very reason we've walked into your office. We know we can't handle this on our own, we want to work as a family. Those, I find, cases that present themselves in that way, those are far and away the most successful cases. The other...
A bit unusual, too, to have such insight at the very beginning.
And you never hear it exactly that way, okay? I'm being a little bit idealistic there, but you can hear bits and pieces of that. Versus, and this may be a case where parents have been depressed or not, versus we have no idea what's going on, we don't know, you're the expert, please help us. And I think that there's a real danger of getting sort of co-opted in being the expert in that kind of a situation. I never miss an opportunity to tell a parent in court or in my office that they're the experts about their kids. And no matter how long I talk to them, that hour or over the next hours over the next several days, they're still going to be the experts. And that's, I truly believe that. I'm a parent myself. Yeah. I'm the expert about my kids. I'm not the expert about yours or people that come to my office. I am a bit expert and can engage in the process through which we can ferret out what's going on, and I think that's a useful commodity for parents to have. I think you get a lot of mileage out of supporting the kind of parents that I see that they want to be. They want to be good parents. And I think if you enlist them early on, you get a much better result. I think you also save yourself from doing an impossible task. You know, one parent, two parents come to your office dragging a 13-year-old who you're seeing laying eyes on for the first time, and they're here now 12 years, after changing diapers and all of that, and they say, here, tell us what you think. Well, okay, but tell me what you think first. Tell me what your son or daughter's strengths or weaknesses are. I know you're here. You didn't come to my office because we're really looking at the strengths. There are a lot of weaknesses. But tell me what they are and how they work in the family. I mean, from a family systems model, we know that families will come to our office and they'll be the IP, the identified patient, the son or daughter. More often than not, and I think about this early on, we all have biases in the work, but I often will see this child as having a target painted on his or her back.
So how does that happen, though? And I mean, in terms of the whys of kids getting into trouble, I mean, how does that dynamic play out and why?
I think kids are basically very loyal. I think they're very loyal to their families. I think in part because they have to be. Kids have a limited number of options. I mean, they can run away, they can get help from local social service agencies, but they're pretty much stuck. As adults, we have some ability, we can get in our car, we can move. I'm not saying we have infinite possibilities, but kids are ever more finite, and I think they're loyal. And I often will say this to families, I know you all don't sit around your dinner table at night and say, Johnny, you're going to be the troublemaker, and Melissa, you're going to be the star student, and Molly, you're going to play the trombone to beat the band. Nobody ever does that. I believe that it's a much more subtle kind of communication. I think that, for example, parents are fighting about this or that. One of the children, and usually the one who winds up presenting in the office with problems, sees mom and dad going at it, and in his or her own way makes a decision not always completely conscious and above board, to draw the heat. Say, I got to do something about this. Because
So they're taking care of the parents, you're suggesting.
we know that kids have a whole array of fantasied beliefs. I mean, if we look at the play that I remember myself getting involved in, I had entire world wars in my sand pile. I would have my toys and my soldiers and all of that. And I created world war and world peace. Now, granted, as we get older, we grow out of that, but I think kids 7, 8, 9, or possibly older, harbor lots of omnipotent kind of fantasies about fixing mom and dad's arguments or whatever.
Okay,
And
so
one way to do that is to get in trouble.
So are you suggesting that kids in trouble is just a sort of second-generation problem for families in trouble? And are you suggesting that perhaps more families are in trouble today than 25 years ago?
I think we talk more about it today. I think 25 years ago or 30 years ago or whatever, I think there were all the same kinds of problems. They may not have been logged in and recorded the way we do it today, but I think they were all the same kinds of problems. I think what might have happened then is people looked within their own walls to take care of issues. And I'm not sure that that's a good thing. I think that often many families, perhaps most families, need help with certain problems. And so I think it's good for people to feel able to go to your office, my office, your clinic, whatever, and say, we're basically an intact family doing relatively well, but we're kind of adrift here.
But is there more stress? Is there more friction? Is there more duress? Are kids in some ways subjected to perhaps that kind of family dynamic?
I don't know if kids see it more today. I mean, we wind up talking about this, whether or not it's in the media or records that kids listen to. Just as I can recall my father not appreciating the music I listened to, I don't particularly appreciate some of the songs that I have 3 adolescent daughters that they listen to. I don't particularly find myself worried that they're going to do behavior ABC because they hear it. I don't think it's often...
Even though some of it is suggestive of violence.
Oh, I think lots of it is suggestive of violence. I think lots of what we see on television is. That alone isn't... I don't think that that's a determinative issue in any way. I was in the recent issue of... I'm blocking what magazine it was. There was some movie star who frequently stars in violent movies. And she was saying, don't blame me. It was a case where I think even President Clinton had identified the show that she frequently appears in as an example of the kind of television that gets kids really riled up. And she took the position of saying, well, this is entertainment and it's a story. I guess what I would add to that is parents need to know what their kids are listening to, what they're watching. I may have the source wrong, but I think it's in Super Predators in Peter Ellicon's book. Though, in fact, as I recall it now, Mark Klaas did a foreword to that book. And in it he said, the #1 problem with kids today is parents. And it was just a foreword, so we didn't go on to elaborate that. But what I'm talking about now is there's a family problem if kids are watching a lot of violent shows and nobody knows about it and nobody talks about it and the kids just kind of go on their merry way playing violent video games, watching violent shows. We have these kinds of things in my household, but I spend a lot of time talking to our kids about it. It's what's the adage, guns don't kill, people do. I think, again, we miss the point. We look too quickly to say, aha, it's either a drug problem or it's an open access to guns or whatever it is. That's the problem. So the solution is, let's set up more drug programs, let's keep guns out of kids' hands. I think those things are fine, but I think if that's all we do, I think we're looking for a social policy cure to a cure that really needs to begin closer to home. Gee, my child is interested in guns or talking about it. Let me talk to that child about it. Having an interest in these things, to me, doesn't translate into, here we have a future mass murderer in the making. Parents have to be involved and know, and they can't be shy about asking. I'll have parents come and say to me, my son is sort of hanging around with this rough group and they're doing this kind of thing, and I'm afraid to bring it up, and I'm afraid if I bring it up, I'll push him away. And I think those are real concerns, and I take that seriously, and I say, well, let's look at the pluses and minuses. What's happened before when you've tried to get involved. I mean, again, some of this is very normal adolescent behavior, as we've said before. I don't know what you remember about your adolescence, but I very much remember thinking that my parents had nothing to tell me at all. I think it's the Mark Twain line about, when I was 17, it was remarkable to me how little my father knew, and then when I was 21, it was remarkable to me how much he had learned in those 4 years. I may have the years wrong, but on that point, I know it's hard that kids don't let parents in, and parents sometimes say, it's easier just not to talk about it at all. I think both in the short run, in the long run, there's a real risk there. And I think in getting back to kids with targets on them, this image that I have of them drawing the heat, drawing the attention, I think it's a situation, and I don't like to make predictions, I'm not saying that, but I think in a situation where there's not regular ongoing communication of some kind, that there's an increased likelihood that a child is going to misinterpret what's going on. Gee, mom and dad are fighting, I'm either going to withdraw, become depressed, or
deflect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that we've got a number of problems here, and I do want to get back to some of the risk factors and some of the whys. We're going to have to take a break,
okay.
So I think this is a good point for that, and then perhaps we can pick up with sort of a little bit of a discussion about the risk factors, because what you're suggesting is it happens in a context, and that context is family very often, maybe school, maybe community. We should talk some about that, I think, in the next segment, so we'll take a break. Thank you.
Have you noticed that no matter how careful you are at saving money, somehow it always seems to get away? Is it part of a larger conspiracy? Or is it that you aren't putting your money in a safe, secure place? Perhaps you should be buying new U.S. savings bonds. For as little as $25, you could be earning competitive rates. And what could be safer? You can even get them indexed to inflation. And with the new Easy Saver plan, you can purchase new U.S. savings bonds automatically from your checking or savings account. You choose how much and how often before they get to it. The new Easy Saver plan for U.S. savings bonds from the U.S. Treasury. Keeping your money just got easier.
If you give me a fish...
Give a man a fish.
If you give someone a fish...
You feed them for a day. A day.
One day.
If you give someone a fish, you feed them for a day.
But if you teach a man to fish...
Teach me to fish.
Teach someone to fish.
And you feed me for a lifetime. A lifetime.
My whole life.
If you teach someone to fish, you feed them for a lifetime.
Give me a fish, and you'll feed me for a day. Teach me to fish, and you'll feed me for a lifetime.
Through Volunteers of America, you can help change lives in your community. Find out what you can do. Give us a call.
Risk factors, if we could talk a little bit about this. Now, let's say, I'm sorry. Let's say you're invited to go to one of the local high schools, and you're given an opportunity to sort of meet a fair number of kids. This is a question about risk factors. So we ended with sort of the thought that maybe a lot of the violence is happening in a context, that these kids aren't just randomly going out and doing violent things, but it's in context. They're troubled about something. What are some of the things you might look for, let's say, if you had an opportunity to meet a whole group of people who hadn't been brought to your office or who hadn't been brought to the court?
Right. I want to mention Ray Flannery. In his book, Preventing Youth Violence, he does a nice job of laying out some early factors, middle factors, and a more emergent diagnostic factor, really. Ray does a nice job of outlining it. Other clinicians have made similar kinds of observations. The early signs have to do with caring attachments in terms of interpersonal relationships and mastery of age-appropriate tasks. So if a child either had some relationships but has been blowing off his or her friends, not seeing them, or you have a child who's never really had a best friend or had any friends at all, has had some problem in mastering interpersonal relationships. And you have to be very cautious about this. Even as I hear myself saying this, there's a danger of sort of the Monday morning diagnosing, or whatever you'd say. I wouldn't want any parent to hear that as, oh, that's my child, you know, there it is. That means my child is hell-bent for election to wind up, you know, being some kind of a problem child. It's a constellation of factors, and it's also environmental. Something else that Ray elucidates is a mastery of age-appropriate tasks. And I think where we see that most often is in school. You see it in either behavioral problems, you see it in grades dropping off. Often you see it, both things happening. I have kids come in, parents bring kids in, not only have grades dropped off dramatically from the last term, but the young boy has gotten into 3 fights waiting out at the bus, and so there's a combination of problems. So basic mastery of age-appropriate skills, generally we see it in school, and these early attachments, family, friends. I think when we start to see problems there, I think Dr. Flannery is right in saying, well, that's an early sign. Let's take a look at that. Let's not overestimate it. Let's talk about that. I don't think automatically, gee, we're going to run to the therapist's office right away, but pay attention.
You're talking about blowing off friends and tending to isolate, but you're not talking about, for example, walking late. You're in terms of developmental tasks, you're talking about relatedness to school or... Right.
Okay. No, I'm not talking about the early milestones. In fact, I'm reminded, as a personal story, one of our daughters didn't speak in sort of proper order, if you will. And there are a number of different ideas, but mostly people sort of shrugged and said, oh, we don't know what's going on. And we had her in an early intervention program. And in short order, they came back and said, oh, she has some terrible behavior problem. And I knew myself, going back to what I said before, I'm the expert about my children. I said, well, I know that that's not the case, and we talked about it, and I won't go into all the details, but it turns out that that wasn't the problem. She didn't have a behavior problem. It actually was an environmental issue that particular day in the class when they decided to say she has a behavior problem. But then whatever the source of the problem was, we worked through it, and it was fine, and she came on to sort of age-appropriate development. So I'm not really talking about those things. I think those issues are very important, and they can be very powerful and overwhelming for families to look at a developmentally delayed child, handicapped child. How do families cope with that stress? And that's something I really don't know a great deal about.
Okay. Well, let's stay with risk factors.
Right.
So you're at the school. What else are you looking for?
I think, again, and I continue to reference Ray Flannery's work here because I think it's a nice piece of work. The sort of middle signs or issues to look for, more sort of classical depression, post-traumatic stress disorder type problems, substance abuse. Now, as I said before, I think it's part and parcel of the age for more teenagers, I think, than latency age kids to be depressed and moody. But I think you neither overestimate that nor you underestimate that. I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but there is no substitution for parents' involvement in these aspects of a child's life. As much as no parent wants to find out that his or her son or daughter is out smoking pot behind the garage, you got to be willing to take that risk. I mean, my attitude is I want to find that out myself. I don't want the local police telling me, we picked up Molly down the street and here she is. Terrible story on the news this morning, a case that I hadn't even heard about, where they were talking about one of these designer drugs, and the mother of this 15-year-old girl who died as a result of this drug being put in there. And here's the mom who educated herself a lot after the fact. It's got to be horrible for her. I mean, she's got to be suffering her own post-traumatic stress now. She educated herself after the fact about the drug and is now educating people about it. We need to step up and educate ourselves about our son or daughter seems kind of depressed, but she couldn't be. We don't get depressed in our family or whatever.
Well, what would teachers be looking for?
Sure. I mean, I think they look for a child who's withdrawn in class. Maybe the child had been involved and exuberant, but then had pulled back. I think you often see that around a particular, it's more of a reactive problem to a problem at home. Parents being together and seeming to be happy, and then they split up. I often see this, and then a student who's otherwise doing pretty well withdraws. And I think that, in a general way, may go back to the issue of the child with this bullseye pointed on them. I need to fix this somehow, but I also feel overwhelmed, and I don't know what to do. And I don't know how to continue doing well in school.
You think teachers are trained to pick up the bullseye or to recognize some of the telltale signs?
I think lots of them are, and I have nothing, we're very fortunate in our interaction with the school systems in our community, and I think that's another part. I think parents have to be involved with the school system. I think that there's this sense that we send our kids off to school, and that's where they get taken care of for the next 6 hours. And I have nothing but praise for the teachers that I've been involved with. I know I've been a pain in the neck to any number of them because I'm there either sending them notes daily, which is what I was doing this morning, sending a note off to one of our daughter's teachers. But they can't do the job. The notion that schools have the ability to educate morally and ethically to our kids it's a very misplaced belief. Parents being involved in the school is vitally important. And it doesn't, you don't have to wait until a teacher sends a note home saying your child is withdrawing in social studies and she was the stellar student before. I think to regularly check in. And I think teachers like that. I mean, some teachers will take the position, this is extra work, here's Mr. Dalton calling me up yet again, he wants to know what's going on. But I think the majority of teachers know that they can't do this themselves, and I think they like to see parents involved.
This is a public school?
The public school system.
Yeah, we're very impressed with the responsiveness of the public schools, and we can compare that experience with 6 years at a fancy private school.
Oh, sure.
Unbelievable how I think the public schools appreciate parental involvement. On the other hand, I do think, and you were suggesting it earlier, that kids do bring their troubles to school. And it would be very nice to know, because I think parents can miss it, live in their own denial, whatever. It'd be nice to know that the schools are on track in terms of picking up telltale signs, and then hopefully referring them out back to the family.
Sure. Yeah, I know a fair number of in-service trainings that, I think, in my experience, public school teachers are trained better than they ever have been. There are lots of professional service days where they go out and do that. And the final thing to look for, which again Ray Flannery points out is the sort of emergent issue, is conduct disorder, actual conduct disorder, kids getting involved in vandalism, dangerous, reckless kind of behavior, where it's then gone from fantasy or thought, if you will, to fact. We've talked about this issue for years in terms of violent behavior in kids and adults. It's one thing to have violent thoughts. It's another thing to cross the line, wherever that line is, and to act on those thoughts. And when you see that, and that's what we often see in court. You don't come into court just to say, hi, how do you do? It's there because, you keyed the neighbor's car, or you started a fire out behind the garage.
You crossed the line.
Yeah.
Okay. So sometimes the kids have trouble sort of distinguishing fantasy from reality, perhaps, and...
Well, I think so. I mean, what prompts someone to finally say, young people or older person, I need to put this fantasy into effect? I don't know. And people will often say, well, if you're having bad thoughts, is that automatically going to lead to bad behavior? I don't think that that's all that's true at all. I think we have a very hard time, though, defining who is the person that can hold on to whatever you want to call them, deviant fantasies. We don't know those people because they don't present themselves. I mean, sometimes they do. People come into the office and say, I haven't done anything, but I'm thinking about doing something. More often than not, we tend to see people after the fact. No.
So you would agree the schools potentially could pick up on a lot of, and maybe there would be a lot of false negatives, but I mean...
But it's better to err on the side of caution, I think, in terms of, and I love that in terms of the public school system. I mean, I think where there are huge public school systems, it's hard to do this. You have to have the right student-teacher ratio, and I think, assistant teachers and all of that, you do much better. You get much more good assessment, if you will, when you've got more staff, obviously. And there's no item too small. I think in a busy school day, you tend to say, well, gee, Jimmy is usually sitting up front, now he's in the back. Well, it's just... And I know that happens, even in good school systems with good teachers. No. There just isn't the time to be able to make that observation.
Well, parents are also dismissive, children, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Teachers,
happens
parents,
at home.
everybody's busy and doesn't always have the time to pay attention. At the end, we'll take a break, but maybe we'll talk a little bit about prevention, further strategies for intervention. Thank you.
It's not just what I get to be. It's not just who I get to meet, or where I get to go. Forget about being sick. Remembering how to be a kid. How to laugh out loud. That anything is possible. Leaving worry on the doorstep. Feeling 10 feet tall. Making plans for the future. I'm still making plans for the future. I'm still making plans for the future.
Where have all the children gone? Long time passing.
Where have all the children gone? Long time ago.
Where have all the children gone? Gone to graveyards one by one.
Oh, when will we ever learn?
Oh, when will we ever learn?
Every day, 10 children are killed by gunfire. The killing won't stop unless you help stop it. Call 1-800-WE-PREVENT to find out what you can do. Not one more lost life, not one more grieving family, not one more.
Oh, when will we ever learn?
In our last segment, we really do want to talk a little bit about strategies for prevention. And in that context, we talked earlier about the growing tendency to want to hold parents accountable for the sins of their kids. Maybe you could comment on that, and then we could talk further about intervention.
Sure.
Prevention, I mean.
I'm very much for the idea of holding parents accountable, but I may have a slightly different sort of twist to that. There's a sort of what's implicit in that is everybody needs to share in the punishment. In whatever your definition of punishment is. Should parents be fined? Should they be jailed? Whatever. To my knowledge, we don't do that anywhere in the Commonwealth. I don't know that we do that anywhere in the United States. And people have said, the more lawyerly types than myself, that raises constitutional problems. I'm not an expert in terms of what that means exactly. But I think the notion of a family being accountable for behavior that I think arguably emanates from the family is important. We were talking earlier about an example that I know in the probate court. It's my understanding, and I'm pretty sure this is accurate, I did a brief check on this before I came in today, that at this point a decree of divorce will not be granted by the court in the Commonwealth to couples that have children until they've attended a 4, 5, 6-hour type parenting class. Now, I don't know all of the particulars of the class, but I believe part of the focus is educating parents about the effect of divorce on children. And I think there are many very sensitive parents who, for a variety of reasons, feel the best thing to do is divorce, and they're well aware of the impact on the kids. But when I think about parents being held accountable, I think that often families need education. And this is, you had said earlier I could be idealistic, so this is my idealistic part of this. And I see this in courts. It happens in juvenile session and adult session. We focus on the person I've said earlier as the identified patient. Call that person the criminal defendant, call that person Johnny with a problem, Melissa with a problem. And in the court system, that's the person the court has authority over. That's the person the court can say, you have to go to counseling. I mean, there are there's other leverage, I think, in cases of extreme violence or abuse or neglect. A court officer or a probation officer can say to parents, you know, you run the risk of losing your child. And there's some parents, I think, who are aghast at that, and other parents who might not be that bothered by it. I think what we need, if we could do something ideally, I think in that situation where a child before the court and there are two parents, even if they're not together, I think if we could structure some kind of a sanction, like what I've just described in probate court, where we have some kind of an educational requirement. Now, it's easy for me to sit here and say that's not punitive. This is a case where it all depends on whose ox is being gored. Some parent will say, who's watching this, who's that guy to say 6 hours of classroom isn't punishment? I'd rather go do 30 days at the local pokey. And so I'm giving up a bias I have here. If we were able to take an entire family, again, here's the idealism, and I don't mean just plop them down into some kind of family therapy session. Right. That may be good, and we do that. I think the secondary message there is, going back to what I said before, we're not the experts. You're not the expert. I'm not the expert about that particular family system and those children. The parents are. And by taking them all together, we're saying, we think that you, the parents, with whatever you want to call it, support, empowerment, encouragement, that you can take care of your own problem. I think it's a bit of an example of the adage, give somebody a fish, feed them for a night, teach them to fish, feed them for a lifetime. We can't, as therapists, as mental health professionals in the court, we can't, in a continuous way, help families or children.
But the thought that you began with is that you have leverage with the kid, and I guess you're being idealistic in suggesting that you would like it to come to pass that you had similar leverage over the kid's parents.
Sure.
So that you could obligate them to go into some kind of psychoeducational counseling.
Right. With the message being, and again, this is where is my education someone else's punishment? The notion is we're not fining you. We're not saying you're a bad parent. We're saying you're here in the court system or you're here in my consultation room because you want to do the right thing. And part of the right thing is, you want either the court or, Dr. Jones to take care of your child, and we're saying the best way to do that is for you to be involved in every step of the process. And you tell us, you continuously give us feedback as to how this is working, because we don't know. This is your child. I say to people all the time, I see them once a week. There's 168 hours in a week. It's vitally more important what goes on between therapeutic sessions. More important than what's done in the session. The session is a place to sort of brainstorm, what are we going to try between now and the next session? And then you come back and you tell me how that worked. I mean, if that's done in a program at a local clinic or in your office or mine, with everybody included, and the message is, again, here's I'm being the broken record, you all are the expert about your kids. We're here to consult and to help you process that, but you're the expert. I think to take the child out of the situation, to say, all right, I'll just see your son or daughter alone, or in the court, only your son has to go to counseling. I know for many parents who feel overworked and overwhelmed and underloved, there are these moments where, the thank God kind of moment, something's going to come out of that. I think that that's more mythical than anything. And I think in other moments, the parents are left with, I'm not very good at this. I think we need to communicate to parents, none of us are very good at it. It's on-the-job training.
But you alluded to your idealism. It's not an ideal world, and part of what's happening is a sort of halfway measure in the direction you're suggesting, and that is the criminalization of the parents along with the kid as a way of getting leverage over them. So the 6-year-old who takes the gun, the fellow who owns the gun,
right,
is charged now with manslaughter or something because he didn't properly supervise the kid and the gun.
Right.
I don't think you're suggesting that the criminalization of the parents is a good idea, because that's too punitive.
That is what I'm saying. And just while you're referencing that, I saw sort of a painfully funny cartoon after that. I believe that was the shooting in Michigan, with a takeoff on Milne's Winnie the Pooh series with Now We Are Six. And in the cartoon, there was a picture of Christopher Robin and Winnie, and I think it was Christopher Robin holding a gun. Now we are 6, and this is how we go about it. I think we have to find a way, and I don't think there's any way. Again, I'm not Pollyanna-ish about this. Courts are in the business of ordering people and ordering sanctions. Judges don't sit on the bench and say, so let's talk about this. Are you interested in doing this? I mean, some jurists will do that, but the bottom line is if the jurist wants you to do it, that's what the order is going to be. I think we need to find a way to include parents and to say to them, how many times have I said it in this talk? They're the experts, even when they don't want to be. Even when they come in at arm's length and say, we're not the experts, we don't know what to do. And then you have the parents, and in this case, the case that you're referencing with the shooting of the 6-year-old boy and the 6-year-old girl, I saw an interview done on a national television show where they interviewed the biological father, and the interviewer said, are you responsible? Now, this is the sad case of a man who I believe has been in prison for 3.5 years of this 6-year-old son's life. And he says, no, I'm not responsible. And the interviewer says, is mother responsible? No. But ultimately, as you've already referenced, the one who's held accountable is the relative, I'm not sure what the relationship is exactly, of the person who either secrets or has this gun in the house. But to go back to what we said before, it's not guns that kill, it's people. That young child may not have been able to form intent I don't know, you and I don't know what was in that child's mind in terms of I'm going to take this to school and I'm going to right some wrong. Something we haven't talked about, and I'll just mention it briefly here, that lots of people think is important. Our former colleague Jim Gilligan has talked about this. Ray Flannery talks about it as well, the issue of shame and humiliation. You know, how does a 6-year-old think about that? I mean, in terms of this case that you're commenting on, I only know what I hear about in the news. You know, was a precursor to this awful act of violence some play yard spat the day before? How is it that that child or anyone thinks about that level of violence being a solution to the problem? Well, you look at the immediate environment. If you believe that no behavior occurs in a vacuum, you say, well, where do you get the message? Well, a message that violence like that is a cure for problems can begin at home, can begin in the community. I think it was in Anna Freud, Dorothy Burlingham, in their writing about London war nurseries. And you got these kids in the London war nurseries, bombs are falling all around them, and they made this observation that it seemed difficult for the kids to kind of maintain some level of composure. Now, who wouldn't have that problem with bombs falling all around? But when you get the message, when there's a world war, or warring nations all over the planet, and you may say, well, those are for political reasons and those are to maintain national boundaries and all of that. The message is still, on an international geopolitical basis, that war is a way to go about solving problems.
Well, there are a lot of societal, a lot that condones it. You know, your psychoeducational approach, and I'll give you the last comment because we have to end. You need psychoeducation for children growing up in bad marriages, not just divorce situations. I mean, there's an awful lot of that goes on where I think parents don't fully appreciate the impact of the tensions on the kids. So, one last comment. Be as idealistic as you'd like. What is the major thing that you think needs to happen that would impact on this problem, do you think?
I think both in the court system, in our private practices, in presentations we do to community groups and schools, we have to emphasize that parents have the power and that we'll help them through all of these systems to feel they have the power, not to drag them down and to say that we know better than they. I think every step of the way we have to say, you're the ones who are the experts.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank
you. Nice beginning, I think something we could talk about for days. So on behalf of the Norfolk Alliance, I want to thank you for being here today. Very much appreciated.
You're welcome. Appreciate being here. Thanks.